Morning, everybody. This is Unit 15, the last one, Reproduction, Anatomy, and Physiology. We are going to talk about the function of the male and female primary and secondary sex organs, compare spermatogenesis and oogenesis, compare the ovarian and menstrual cycles, explain how hormones control the activities of the male and female reproductive organs, the major stages of development, the basic changes in the female occurring during pregnancy, and discuss selected reproductive diseases or disorders. So the primary sex organs, or the gonads, are those involved in making sperm and egg. So in men, that would be the testes, and in females, that would be the ovaries. Everything else, all the other parts, which are used to secrete fluids or carry a baby or aid in the travel of sperm or eggs, are considered secondary sex organs. Only the testes and ovaries are the primary sex organs. So this is the male reproductive system, and you have pictures of this, and all the parts that you need to know are listed in your lab manual and on your master list. What you should know, the testes are hanging in a sac called the scrotum, and sperm are made in the testes and travel through the testes to the epididymis, to the vas deferens, which goes up into the body and connects up here to the urethra, just right between the prostate and seminal vesicle. I'll show you that on the different slide here. And then the seminal vesicle and the prostate gland, which is right under the bladder here, secrete fluids right ahead of the sperm, which travels down the urethra inside the penis to the outside of the body. All right, the testes are contained in the scrotum. They hang outside the body because body temperature is too hot for sperm to survive. So if the testes fail to descend during birth, that is surgically repaired. Otherwise, the boy is going to end up infertile as a man. Sperm production starts in tubes inside the testes called the seminiferous tubules. That's where the spermatogenic cells are, and at puberty they will be induced to generate sperm. Also in the testes are interstitial cells, and those are the cells that produce testosterone. So the seminiferous tubules are several feet in length, but they're wound up and coiled, and the sperm travel through them and then into the epididymis, which is another series of tubes. The whole time they are maturing. It takes 60 to 100 days for sperm to travel all the way through the seminiferous tubules and the epididymis before they are ejaculated. Okay, so the epididymis is green here. It's another series of tubes where sperm mature. Okay. From that point on, the epididymis is where the sperm were when we left the last slide, for example, and they are not yet motile. They're not swimming in the male. They never swim in the male. They're ejaculated and only start swimming at that point. From the epididymis, they're going to travel through the vas deferens or ductus deferens, depending on the textbook you're looking at, up into the body. This is what is cut during a vasectomy, is the vas deferens. As they travel up, it comes up above the bladder, and it connects to the ejaculatory duct, which is what is coming down from the seminal vesicle. The seminal vesicle and the prostate glands both secrete fluids right ahead of the sperm before ejaculation, because the sperm are about to enter the urethra, and the urethra carries urine, making it acidic, which would kill the sperm. So the seminal vesicle and the prostate glands secrete a neutralizing fluid right ahead of the sperm to help basically clear the way so the sperm can survive the acidic environment. There's also some sugar and some vitamins, vitamin C, and some other things to help nourish and care for the sperm. The bulbourethral gland will also secrete a fluid. The bulbourethral gland, you can barely see a little tiny dot right there. That secretes a fluid that lubricates the end of the penis. That lubrication fluid exactly matches that secreted in the vagina or in the vulva of the female. Anyway, those three fluids plus the sperm is now collectively called semen. And it should be 2 to 3 milliliters and contain over 100 million sperm per milliliter to be considered fertile. Okay, here's another picture. You can see that vas deferens here. They actually put it in the picture, which is nice, and how it connects right in front of the ejaculatory duct and right before the seminal vesicle. This is the bladder, and the prostate gland right underneath. You can see it right there. Okay, so the sperm is traveling down now the urethra through the penis. Outside the body, the scrotum is the sac that contains the testes, and again, it hangs outside the body to keep the sperm cool. It will actually hang lower on hotter days and cup closer to the body during colder days to keep the temperature of the testes whatever the sperm like. The penis contains erectile tissue. Basically, more blood goes in than can leave during an erection, and so that erection is not a muscle contraction, it's basically more blood. Okay, so this, it's called the corpus spongiosum, is tissue that can hold more blood. Okay, at the end of the penis it's called the glans penis, and that's where a lot of nerve endings are, which is why it hurts so much when a guy gets hit there. And covering the glans penis is called a foreskin or prespice. This is removed during circumcision or cut so it doesn't cover the end. And about half of baby boys are now circumcised. It was not done for a while, then done to everybody, and then it kind of goes back and forth. But the parents decide whether they want the baby circumcised or not. Okay, so hopefully that clears up where you have all the parts that you need to know for the male reproductive system. For the female reproductive system, this is a face-on picture. Again, the ovaries are the primary sex organ, and like testes, women have 2 of them, but they are up along the back of the pelvic wall. They are not outside the body. Okay, from the ovary, eggs are released, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and caught by the fimbriae of the uterine tube or fallopian tube, and the egg will travel down the fallopian tube, and somewhere in the uterine tube or fallopian tube is where fertilization takes place. And then it will travel down, the fertilized egg will travel down and attach to the uterine wall. And if that attachment works and forms a good placenta and umbilical cord and all that, then a baby grows in the uterus. The base of the uterus is known as the cervix. That stays closed, okay, until a baby goes out, because the cervix is rigid and closed so to protect the uterus from bacterial infections. Okay, we'll see that again here. You can see the ovaries, the fallopian tube, the uterus, and the cervix. Again, you have 2 ovaries held there by ligaments. They develop before birth and stay there, just like the testes do in the male. Now, the vagina or birth canal also can vasodilate or expand to accept the size of the penis, but the penis does not enter the cervix. Again, that stays rigid and closed. Vagina can actually extend back behind this to expand a little bit, but you don't penetrate the cervix with sex. All right, the uterine tubes or fallopian tubes at the end of where they are near the ovaries, they don't actually physically touch them. The fimbriae are kind of flaps, and they beat in time to the woman's heartbeat. And when an egg is released from the ovary, it kind of gets pulled or sucked up into the fallopian tubes. It's kind of cool. They've caught that on camera now. The uterus, the lining is the endometrium, epithelial tissue, and that's what you lose during menstruation. And the wall is muscle, smooth muscle, it's not under voluntary control, called the myometrium. And then the base of the uterus, between the uterus and the vagina, is the cervix. Okay. Then the vagina, otherwise known as the birth canal, goes from the cervix to the outside of the body. The outside of the body, all this is called the vulva, and it includes the labia, which are the flaps of skin and fat that protect the opening of the vagina. It's kind of analogous to the scrotum in the male. And then the space is called the vestibule, and you have vestibular glands there that secrete lubricating fluid. The clitoris, like the glans penis, has a lot of nerve endings, and in fact in sex change operations they can make the clitoris into a tiny penis for women. And remember the urethral opening, if you go back and look, I guess you can't see that side picture there, but the bladder is kind of beneath the uterus. I'll have a picture of that right here. I'll have to show you that later. All right, sperm and egg making. Making sperm is called spermatogenesis, and making eggs is called oogenesis. And they're similar, but they have some distinct differences. Obviously, they occur in different people, right? Spermatogenesis occurs in men in the testes, and oogenesis occurs in women in the ovaries. Both start at puberty. Okay, both start at puberty, but spermatogenesis continues for the rest of a man's life. Unless something were to happen to the parts, spermatogenesis continues. So a man is fertile from puberty till death. In women, oogenesis stops at menopause. Okay, so we have a shorter reproductive life. From one spermatogonia cell, from one original cell, you end up with 4 sperm in spermatogenesis. In oogenesis, you only end up with 1. The divisions still happen during meiosis, and I can show you a picture of that. However, one oocyte during the division, one side will get all the cytoplasm and the other half only gets the nucleus, so that doesn't survive. So there's 2 splits in meiosis, resulting in going from 1 to 2 to 4 in spermatogenesis, but in oogenesis you end up with just 1 because every time it splits, one side of it dies. Again, you use meiosis, not mitosis. And the difference between meiosis and mitosis is at the end, the cells have half the DNA, which is good, right? Because if a sperm has half and the egg has half, when they get together, you got the whole set again. So here's a picture of spermatogenesis. You have all these spermatogonia cells hanging out, and puberty comes along and it initiates meiosis starting. You get some mitosis, or the first step, you get mitosis, so you always have some primary spermatocytes left over. And then meiosis starts with the primary spermatocyte, and meiosis 1, you end up with 2 secondary spermatocytes. Okay, so primary spermatocyte becomes 2 secondary spermatocytes. Each one of those splits again in meiosis 2, and you end up with 4 spermatotids. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is what is pushed into the seminiferous tubules, travels through the epididymis, they get mature, and at the end you end up with the tadpole-like shape of sperm that everybody knows what they look like, right? Okay, so when they're first made, they're just regular cells as spermatotids. It takes that maturation process to end up making them eventually be able to be motile. Okay. If you want to see that process in action, there's a cool link there, so go back to the original PowerPoint and check that out. It's kind of cool to watch. Oogenesis, meiosis, actually starts before before that female is born. And so you have these primary oocytes that are just waiting, and a whole bunch of them die between the time that they develop and the little girl ends up being 12 years old or whenever puberty starts for her. So puberty comes along and meiosis 1 happens, and it splits, and you get a split into a secondary oocyte and a polar body. Because like I said, this cell, the secondary oocyte, got all the cytoplasm. And here, there's only a nucleus, so it can't survive and it dies. Okay, so you have one secondary oocyte and then again it stops. Okay, so here you're arrested until puberty. Here the process is arrested until a sperm comes along. Only if a mature sperm is present and fertilizes that or starts to penetrate the secondary oocyte will it split again. Will meiosis actually finish? Again, you get another polar body, and at this point you have an egg which lasts momentarily, because that egg is going to, the nuclei are going to fuse between the sperm. The head of the sperm is the nucleus of the sperm, and the nucleus of the secondary oocyte, or egg now, will fuse, and you have a fertilized egg. So when it comes to oogenesis, you end up with an egg that has half the DNA, just like you have sperm with half the DNA, but you only end up with one, and it can only complete if a sperm is around. Sperm mature whether women are around or not. It happens all inside the male. So when you compare the two from the original stem cells, spermatogonia cells or oogonia, you end up with 4 sperm, and from oogonia you end up with 1 egg, and basically that only happens if sperm is around. Okay, so here's a picture of an egg with a sperm penetrating, getting through the wall or the shell of the egg to allow for fertilization. So sperms are the smallest cells in the body. The head contains only DNA and some enzymes on the surface to help penetrate the egg. It contributes no cytoplasm whatsoever. There are mitochondria in the base of the sperm, right here, right behind the head, but they never get inside the egg. They are only used to power the flagella while they're swimming up the vagina, the cervix, the uterus, and into the fallopian tubes. The egg, however, is the largest cell in the human body. The secondary oocyte is what is traveling down the fallopian tubes, hoping to find a sperm. It only has about 24 hours to live, whereas the sperm can live up to 3 days. So peristalsis is moving it down the fallopian tube, and if there's a sperm there, fertilization will finish oogenesis. If not, when it gets to the uterus, when the lining is lost during menstruation, the egg, the secondary oocyte, which is dead by then, will be lost in menstruation as well. Okay, so the egg contributes all the cytoplasm and organelles to the fertilized egg, which is called a zygote. We're going to come back to that here in a minute. So the ovarian and the menstrual cycles, you should know a little bit about these, and we're going to talk about this diagram starting from the bottom. Notice along the bottom, what's being compared here is the days, day 1 to day 28. Both cycles are 28 days in length. And what you're measuring depends on which graph you're looking at. And we're going to look at the bottom one first. Okay, this is the menstrual cycle. The first couple days of the menstrual cycle, you're losing the lining. So you're bleeding or having a period or whatever you want to call it. The first couple of days of the menstrual cycle, the lining is being lost, because what they're measuring here is how thick the lining of the uterus is, how thick the endometrium is. And you're losing it the first couple days, and then notice it starts to get thicker, and it's at its thickest at day 23 or so, over here. If day 28 hits and you're not pregnant, or there's no implantation, the lining is again lost. And the 28 days is average. Not all women hit 28 days. In fact, very few do, but that's the average. So that is the menstrual cycle. The ovarian cycle, which is kind of the second section of this picture, again, 28 days. The first 14 days, or the first half, is called the follicular phase because the follicles, which are on the ovary, there's a kind of a picture of it up here, are developing. Several follicles will develop, but the largest one, called the dominant follicle, at day 14 is going to rupture and release the secondary oocyte. Day 14 is referred to as ovulation. Okay, so the secondary oocyte is now out of the ovary and it's traveling down the fallopian tube. But the second half of the ovarian cycle is referring to the ovary. So forget for a minute that the egg is going down the fallopian tube. Back at the ovary, what's left over from this follicle, and you can see up here in this picture how it's colored yellow, is called the corpus luteum, and lutea means yellow in Latin. What's left over from that ruptured follicle develops into the corpus luteum, which starts to produce estrogen and progesterone. So if fertilization occurs on day 15, right, it has to occur within 24 hours because otherwise the secondary oocyte will die. It's going to take a week, roughly 6 to 7 days, for it to get to the uterus and implant. So for that 6 or 7 days, that fertilized egg has got to live on the cytoplasm of the egg. So hopefully there's lots of glucose in there so it can start to replicate. The corpus luteum will stick around and produce progesterone because progesterone maintains the lining of the uterus. And notice down here in the menstrual cycle, it's getting thicker and thicker and thicker because progesterone is going up and up and up. That's the black line here in the middle diagram. So progesterone saves the lining so that by the time a week later, after ovulation, day 21, 22, when that fertilized egg gets there, it has nice thick lining to snuggle down in there and get a good attachment so that the baby can grow. Estrogen, you can see there's the blue line, kind of goes up right before ovulation. It actually inhibits ovulation until day 14. And then it goes up again as the corpus luteum starts to produce estrogen and progesterone. So the second half of the ovarian cycle is referred to as the luteal phase because that's where the action is at the ovary. The ovarian cycle basically talks about what's happening at the ovary. The first half, the follicles are developing, so it's called the follicular phase. The second half, the corpus luteum, is the dominant active part, and so it's called the luteal phase. Day 14 is ovulation. So if you wanted to know what day you ovulated, you count from the first day of your period 14 days later, and on average, that's when ovulation occurs. You can also take your temperature. Notice it, body temperature tends to go up at ovulation, and that's one way some women can tell. All right, so what does estrogen and progesterone do? Estrogen is released from the follicle and the corpus luteum. It thickens the uterine lining before ovulation and prepares the body for that process. It actually inhibits it, or inhibits LH, which is the hormone that induces ovulation, until day 14. Progesterone maintains the lining of the uterus. If you're pregnant, it helps maintain a pregnancy. So if you want to keep the lining or keep a pregnancy, you have to have progesterone released. Sometimes women who go into preterm labor, they give them progesterone to try to keep them pregnant because it's always better to develop inside than outside. Okay, so LH in men stimulates the release of testosterone, but in women, it induces ovulation. FSH stimulates sperm production in men, and in women, it stimulates follicle development. So FSH does similar things, just in different in the sexes. Progesterone and estrogen stimulate endometrial lining thickness, so the wall of the uterus. It induces mammary gland development and all kinds of other things during pregnancy. But before pregnancy, at puberty, testosterone and estrogen cause all kinds of changes in the human body. If you took blood from a boy and a girl age 10 or sometime before puberty, you wouldn't actually be able to detect differences in estrogen and testosterone levels. They're equal. But at puberty, boys are going to make testosterone and girls are going to make estrogen and progesterone. In boys, it causes facial hair to start to grow, the genital organs get bigger, muscle and bone development occur, especially in conjunction with growth hormone, and it also changes the brain. Okay, it causes sex drive, different types of feelings, different areas of the brain might be more active or less active during certain types of thinking. For example, one interesting finding is before puberty, if you give a girl and a boy a math problem, the same part of the brain lights up when they are thinking about it. But afterwards, different parts of the brain are used. Okay, and so there's lots of research into this because it was thought for a long time that boys were better at math than girls. They don't think so. They think it's just different parts of the brain attack math problems differently after puberty. In girls, estrogen causes mammary gland development, and progesterone does that as well. The genital organs grow, but it also plays a role in bone density. It protects the heart and liver, which is why women have less heart attacks until after menopause, because estrogen is a little bit protective. It also changes the brain. It is involved in memory and cognition and thinking, just like testosterone is on men. And when estrogen goes away at menopause, some of the side effects are bone density goes down, breast development or breasts shrink, memory loss might be more common, you can't remember stuff. It also helps maintain body temperature, and without that, they think that's one of the reasons for hot flashes, for example. So, I'm going to go back to the fallopian tubes where fertilization takes place and talk a little bit about the stages of development and pregnancy. This is a good time to pause if your brain is fried and come back and work on development a little bit later. Okay, so part 2, development and pregnancy. The fertilized egg is called the zygote. Okay, zygote is the fertilized egg, and for 24 hours it just sits there. It takes a little bit to get everything all organized, and then it starts to divide. 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells. At 8 cells or so, it's called a morula, and cleavage is rapidly happening. 8, 16, 32, etc. And it's still traveling down into the uterus. Okay, we're not there yet. But day 4 or 5, that morula becomes a blastocyst, which is a hollow ball of cells, and the outside of the ball is going to become the placenta, and the inner cell mass is going to become the baby. And I'll show you a picture of a blastocyst here in a second. The blastocyst is what needs to attach to the uterus. That process is called implantation, and it's hard. There's estimates that 3 out of 5 times it doesn't work. And if you don't get good implantation, you don't have a good attachment, you're never going to be able to nourish an entire fetus. Okay, so the blastocyst has to implant. And remember, we're at day 21, 22, 23, right when the lining is the thickest. So conditions are perfect for this to do it. But if it doesn't work, then the blastocyst dies, and it's sloughed off during menstruation, and the girl, woman, etc. would never even know she had been pregnant. At 2 weeks, it's called an embryo. So the blastocyst attaches at the end of the first week, and by the end of the second week, it has already undergone what's called gastrulation, and you have a tiny little embryo that in the next 6 weeks, so from the end of week 2 to the end of week 8, all the organ systems develop. By the end of 8 weeks, the heart's beating, you have a urinary system, a respiratory system, and pretty much you just grow from that point on. And fetus is mostly just growth. Certainly there's things that are still developing, particularly the brain. The brain is not fully developed until age 2, but we couldn't stay inside mom until then. We'd be too big to be delivered. So fetal development is mostly growth. So here's some pictures. Fertilization happens again in the uterine tube. It takes about 24 hours before you start to replicate, before mitosis starts. And you have a morula undergoing cleavage, and the cells are getting smaller because as they divide, you only have a certain amount of volume, right? You only have the fertilized egg here. We're not attached to mom yet, so we can't suck nutrients out of mom. Okay, so this is tumbling down the fallopian tube towards the uterus. Okay, and when it gets there, it becomes, it pops or opens, it becomes a blastocyst, which is a hollow ball of cells. The ICM here, inner cell mass, that's what's going to become the baby. The T, the trophoblast, the cells on the outside, will become the placenta. And this is going to be filled with amniotic fluid here. Okay. The trophoblasts also secrete a hormone called HCG, and that's what triggers a positive pregnancy test. It's only produced by a trophoblast or a blastocyst. Implantation should occur between day 6 and 7. Shows a picture of this. This is the uterine wall along the top here, and this hollow ball of cells is pushing into it, and it's going to form with the cells on the outside, the trophoblasts, form that placenta and attachment. Gastrulation occurs, which is basically the development of 3 stem cell layers, and each one of those is going to become particular cells in different organ systems. And at the end of week 2, so 2 weeks after ovulation, a woman would normally menstruate at this point. Already you have this starting to develop. And at the end of 8 weeks, okay, so you've only missed 1 period, you have an 1.5 inch little teeny weeny baby, essentially. All the organ systems have formed and are working. You have eyes, ears, toes, fingers. You can see the spinal cord here, the brain. And pretty much after this point, you're going to have just growth. If you want to look at each one of those embryo stages, there's lots of cool websites that do that. Feel free to Google that or check this one out. And then fetal development from week 9 to the end of pregnancy. Pretty much everything just gets bigger. Okay, most of the organ systems have formed, they just get larger. So what happens when you're pregnant? Well, you're going to gain some weight. Average is 22 to 36 pounds. Some women more, some women less. What's even more interesting to me is how organs get pushed out of the way. You can see how the liver and the stomach kind of get flattened a little bit. The intestines get pushed up and around the developing baby. Notice in this picture the uterus is tipped over top of the bladder, and that makes the woman feel like she's got to pee all the time, although it'll tip back a little bit during the 2nd trimester to give her a little bit of a relief. But pretty much by the end you can see this baby is just using that bladder as a springboard. Some other things that happen: your respiratory rate will increase up to 50%, even though your lungs are kind of squished. Kidneys will filter up to 85% more because it's not only filtering your stuff, but it's filtering the baby's waste as well. Cardiac output can go up 40%. So your heart's got to work a lot harder to pump blood around not only you, but circulation for the baby. Blood volume goes up 50%. This is another reason for weight gain, because now you have 7 liters of blood instead of 5. You're also hungry. At some point, it gets almost impossible to eat enough nutrients to support you and the baby. One of the theories of labor is the baby just gets hungry, and that induces labor because you can't eat enough to keep him or her happy. Also, at the same time of all this going on, you're growing mammary glands and ducts so that you can nurse the child. So think about the side effects that this occurs, that are happening for mom, right? She's making more urine and has to pee all the time. Her heart rate is probably higher. She has increased blood volume, so is heavier, and water retention might occur, which causes her feet and hands to swell. She's breathing more rapidly, and she's hungry all the time. Acid reflux is a problem, and you can see in this picture here, if the stomach is squished like this, acid is more likely to be pushed up and cause heartburn. So the side effects of pregnancy just don't sound fun at all. Again, breast development occurs at puberty, but mammary glands and ducts will not start to develop until pregnancy. Progesterone is what causes that to happen. And that's high during pregnancy, remember, because you got to maintain the lining of the uterus or maintain a pregnancy. That's all due to progesterone. So progesterone makes the boobs, prolactin makes the milk, and oxytocin allows for milk letdown or milk secretion to occur. Lots of hormones going on during pregnancy. The last couple of slides here, some random topics in reproduction. Contraception is used to prevent a pregnancy, and I'm going to tell you what each one is here. If you want to learn more about each one of these, there's 2 good websites that will help explain them and also the effectiveness. Coitus interruptus is Latin for the withdrawal method. I'll pull it out before I come, I promise type thing. This doesn't work very well if this is your method of birth control. You have a 20 to 25% chance, I think, of being pregnant within a year. Because the problem is there's always some semen being released. And it only takes 1 sperm. Second of all, it's hard to do. And third, it's hard to know when ovulation is. And so even if you're trying to be careful around just ovulation time, women don't always ovulate right at day 14. That is the rhythm method, essentially, is trying not to have sex around the time of ovulation or pulling out when you think the woman is ovulating. Again, it's 13 to 20% failure rate because it's not always known when the woman ovulates. And that egg has 24 hours to live, while sperm have 2 to 3 days. So even having sex on day 12, the sperm could still be alive when the woman ovulates. Condoms and spermicides are the only one on this list, besides not having sex at all, that prevent sexually transmitted infections, especially when used with spermicides. So condoms are a good choice for that. They're fairly inexpensive compared to some methods. However, the disadvantage is you got to stop and put them on. And you got to do that every time. So if condoms are your method of contraception and they're not used consistently, they're not going to work either. A diaphragm or cervical cap is kind of like a condom for a woman. It too blocks sperm travel. It can be placed up into the vagina ahead of time, so you don't have to stop in the moment. It has to be fitted, however, by a medical professional. And if a woman gains or loses a lot of weight, sometimes they don't fit right, and the sperm can go around. Okay, they can be left there for up to 24 hours. In fact, they tell you should leave them for 6 to 8 hours after sex so that the sperm die. There's lots of different methods using estrogen and progesterone. You can take them in the form of a pill, a patch, an implant. The Nuva ring is coated with them and it's placed up into the vagina for 21 days, so you don't have to take a pill each day. And pills are fairly effective. They work by blocking the ovulation and or oogenesis. The problem is you have to take them every day. And antibiotics, stress, and other situations can sometimes mess with the pill or mess with those hormones. However, they're fairly good at preventing pregnancy if used consistently. The IUD, which is what the picture is a T-shaped device placed into the uterus, and it's got copper in it and sometimes estrogen and progesterone, and it's thought to block implantation. It doesn't block fertilization, it blocks implantation. And the new ones can be placed there for up to 5 years, or the second variety is up to 10 years, which is pretty handy. You don't have to take any pills or anything. IUDs kind of got a bad rap back in the 60s and 70s, causing heavy periods, and sometimes they didn't work and a baby was born with an IUD stuck on its head or something. But the new ones are thought to be better. They do have a string, kind of like fish line, that hang down to allow it to be removed. And I've had students say that pokes the penis and it can be painful for the man. So obviously that wouldn't work very well if that was a side effect. Last, the most permanent method of contraception is to cut the vas deferens or cut the fallopian tubes. Cut, cauterize, block, somehow ruin those tubes so sperm can't travel there. This is not generally reversible, although you can have operations to do that. That's not covered by insurance at all. So it's pretty expensive to try to change your mind about that. So this is a pretty permanent solution, and some people don't want, you're not going to be able to have kids after that. However, it is, particularly for men, it's fairly safe and easy to do. It's outpatient and can be done very quickly. Okay, some reproductive disorders. STIs are sexually transmitted infections, and they are present and out there. Syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia are all bacterial and can be treated with antibiotics. They recently changed it from STD to STI, hoping that people would realize that a disease, which they correlated with incurable, to infection could be fixed with antibiotics. I don't know if that's true or not, but if you think there's something wrong, you should get it checked out. If you are tested positive for an STI, the public health department will ask you about your partners, and they will be contacted and asked to come in and be checked, because you can have an STI and not even know it, especially in men. Sometimes there's not a lot of signs or symptoms. The most common kind of cancers are breast cancer for women and prostate cancer for men. Number one most common cancer are reproductive cancers. It's not the number one killer. Most people, like 90% or 85% of breast cancer, people who are diagnosed with breast cancer are alive 5 years later. We really are getting pretty good at treating these. Lung cancer is the most deadly, but breast cancer and prostate cancer are the most common. So there's some more information and facts and figures about that if you're interested. Endometriosis is somewhat of a common problem in women. It's basically when that lining just grows and grows and grows and won't stop. It can cause pretty heavy periods, be very painful. If it grows out of the uterus, it can be dangerous. If it can't be controlled by hormones or other treatments, women have hysterectomies to fix this. So there's some more information there if you're interested in endometriosis. Infertility is about half time it's a problem in the male and half time it's a problem in the female. And in men, they're going to ask, can you get an erection? Can you ejaculate? Because without those two things, it's not going to work. And then they'll do sperm count and motility. In women, again, they'll look at the uterine wall, check to see if ovulation is working, and sometimes they can't find anything wrong in either partner, and it's just unknown. So there's lots of research and interest in infertility because it's pretty depressing for people that can't get pregnant. So that is basically the reproductive system in a nutshell. Check out the reading assignment. Look in your lab book for the parts that you need to know on the male and female reproductive system because they will be on the final or on your lab test. There's lots of good websites in this PowerPoint, or you can Google. Be careful what you say when you search for reproductive items though. Anyway, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me.